Hi everybody, Chris here. Welcome back to 30-Day Excel Analyst. This is day 4. Now, if you're watching live, a big welcome to you. Leave me a comment in the chat. I will discuss all those at the end. If you're watching on replay, big welcome to you too. Remember to leave me a comment below. Very happy to deal with your questions there. But this is day 4. This is when we get into the toolkit. Yeah, in the next 10 to 15 minutes, although sometimes it ends up being 20, I'm going to outline the exact tools I am using in Excel. They're based on the 4 applications of Excel that we discussed yesterday in session 3. Remember, the whole playlist for 30-Day Excel Analyst is in the video description below, so you can go to any videos on the playlist there. Built around the 4 applications of Excel, and it's what I suggest you adopt as your toolkit. We're simplifying things, guys. We're simplifying because there's so much noise in Excel, so much you can use, so many people saying you have to use this, have to use that. So what do I actually use day to day? You might be surprised. It might be less than you think. So welcome back to day 4, guys. So we're going to work through our 4 applications of Excel. Yesterday, we spoke about what do organizations actually do in Excel. I told you about my research project, my general theory of Excel usage, and we made the tentative conclusion that people are only doing one of 4 things. Yes, this is your first simplifying idea. People are only doing one of 4 things in Excel. So when you're talking about Excel, what people are trying to do, you should be doing that translation, one of our meta skills, translation. So this person is trying to do this. I'm trying to do this. My husband's trying to do this, whatever it is. Which of the 4 areas does it fall into? What are those 4 areas? Stop the video. Stop the video. What are those 4 areas? We've got data management. That's the first one we're going to talk about today. We've got 23 techniques on this slide. We've got modeling using Excel. We're going to talk about modeling. We've got data analysis in Excel, and we've got automation in Excel. So whatever you're trying to do falls into one of those 4 categories. So data management to begin with, let's talk it through, and the rest of the program is structured in terms of these 4 applications. So next week, this first week has been about context and motivation. Next week is about data management in Excel. So firstly, we're talking about data input, data input to begin with. I've said cell validation is often overlooked, but data input generally is such an overlooked area of Excel practice. Why is that important? Well, how many data cleansing jobs have you done in Excel? If you've ever used Excel, you've probably done some kind of data cleansing. So people's names being spelt wrong, data being inputted incorrectly, that there's a letter at the end of some numbers that means Excel doesn't work properly. So you've got low quality data, but the truth is we don't have to do data cleansing, and we are going to deal with data cleansing over here. We don't have to do data cleansing at all if the data is inputted correctly in the first place. Validation, the concepts of validation. What on earth is validation? Well, validation, very simply, and it is a simple concept, it's limiting the inputs to the spreadsheet. Limiting the inputs to the spreadsheet, for example, by forcing the user to choose in the form of a drop-down menu. We've all seen those drop-down menus in Excel. For example, by making the user choose from a range of values, a value from 0 to 100, for example. And there's different forms of validation that we're going to talk about next week. This is often overlooked. Cell validation. Cell validation. This is the number one way to guarantee that you're going to be working with high quality data, is to put cell validation. So there we're talking drop-down menus, but we're talking about more than that. Other types of validation, things like numerical validation. You can even validate by controlling the length of the text. So how many characters is in a piece of text that somebody's going to input? And then using things like guidance messages. So rather than saying to the user, you can't input this, we want to be directive and helpful with our guidance message. We can do that just with basic cell validation. We can say to the user, we can't accept this input, but we might be able to accept something else. What else have we got on data input? Well, helpful layout and formatting. Yes, if the spreadsheet isn't laid out properly, if the columns are in the wrong order or they're confusing, that's not going to help data input. A quick tip is put all of your data input columns together. If you've got a situation where you need the user to input some data, and let's face it, most spreadsheets have, put all those data inputs columns together rather than having data input and then a formula and then data input. That kind of helpful layout and formatting can help guarantee data quality. That's what we're trying to do with data input. What else is going to help us here? Keyboard shortcuts. Certainly, if you're working on your own, being able to navigate Excel generally via the keyboard, this is really helpful. And we do have a dedicated session coming up later. But we can also do things like go into a drop-down menu, Alt and down arrow on the Windows PC will get you into a drop-down menu. So keyboard shortcuts, being confident with those, that's another way that we can improve the quality of the data going into our spreadsheets. But when we're talking about data input, very soon we're going to have data stacking up in a spreadsheet. We've all been in the situation, data sets changing in size. So we need a strategy for managing data sets that change in size, because we want our formulae, which will be pointing at a whole column in that data. We want that formula to work, even if there's data added to the data set, even if there's rows removed from that data set, we want that formula to work. So this is where tables come in. This is where tables come in our Excel practice. When we're talking about capacity management, extra rows, fewer rows, we still want everything to work. The easiest way is to do that with tables. I've put my trigger warning here because I don't use tables a huge amount. I actually recommend dynamic ranges for doing this kind of thing. But for beginners to get started with tables. So just some tips there for getting started with data input, and data input being one aspect of data management, which is one of our 4 skill areas, of course. So let's move on. Data imports. Okay, this I'm finding I'm doing more and more in my Excel development project. So we want to bring multiple data sets together. And there's a specific situation that I find myself doing this in. People using online forms. Now, online forms have become more common in recent years. So I'm talking things like Microsoft Forms, things like Google Forms. And I love these forms. They're so easy to use. You can fill out these forms on your phone, on your iPad. It's a great way to get data from the user. It's much better than sending them a spreadsheet and asking them to fill it out and attach it to an email. That, I think, is outdated these days. And in 30-day Excel Analysts, we're going to focus on ways you can avoid having to do that kind of time-consuming thing. So data collection and collation options for the modern Excel Analyst and the Get Data. So if you go to the Data tab in Excel, you've got a Get Data option there. So next week, we're going to look at how to set up an online form and how to get the data from an online form into desktop Excel. This is a beautiful combination, a fish and chips type combination. I'm from the UK, so I love my fish and chips, of course, because it's a beautiful synergy between 2 things. So data import, getting data into a spreadsheet. This is an essential aspect of data management. We'll be covering this next week as well. So data cleansing, let's say, with the best will in the world, we've done of all our data input measures, our cell validation, things like that. And we're still working with low quality data. And it might be that you didn't have any control over the data input. You've come into the project later. You've got to do some data cleansing. So I mentioned this at the beginning. It's situations where we've got names spelled incorrectly. It might be, who knows, dates, numerical inputs displaying as dates. The data is just not in the right form. We might have some really nasty ones like having a space after an input. All of this falls under data cleansing. So what tools might you use for data cleansing? Well, we'll talk about Power Query and the role of Excel VBA at the end. But I'd recommend looking at formulae first. So left, right, mid, len, find, mod, things like substitute, replace. These formulae are all going to help with data cleansing in Excel. So I recommend learning these formulae as part of your data management toolkit. Finally, data manipulation. So we've got data into the file. We've managed to clean it. We now need to manipulate it. We want this data here. We might want to bring data from multiple files into a single file. You might want to deaggregate data into multiple files, whatever works in your situation. So once again, I do recommend keyboard shortcuts. If we're going to do it manually using copy paste, yes, we want to move away from copy paste. But if there's no alternative than to doing a copy paste, you've got to learn those keyboard shortcuts. It's going to save you so much time. Yesterday, I was doing a copy paste job and I did it using keyboard shortcuts. Really speeds things up. But serious work requires Power Query or VBA when we're talking about data manipulation. And you can see the position of these boxes. Power Query could be used to help with data import, could be used to help with data cleansing, could be used to help with data manipulation. So Power Query is a super powerful facility. Came into Excel, well, around 10 years ago, I think. And the main thing it allows us to do is to bring data sets together, So for example, when we're importing data from an online form, I use Power Query to do that, to get that data into Excel. But it does a bit more than that, because when we're bringing the data in, we can perform some operations. I think they're called steps in Power Query. We can perform some operations on that data. We could remove some columns. We can remove blanks and errors, so data cleansing. We could add some calculations using Power Query. We could extract some rows according to a certain criteria. Many other options with Power Query. So next week, we will jump into Power Query, at least just cover some of the basic stuff, because in 30-day Excel Analyst, it's not a super technical thing. It's about giving you the overview, and then you know what you need to learn. You can go and find the videos on YouTube to learn the technical stuff, but we will touch on the main ideas. Now, an alternative to Power Query, and my personal preference, is to use Excel VBA. If you're working on desktop Excel and you've got the option, I prefer Excel VBA to Power Query. The disadvantage to Power Query is you're creating these connections between the files, and those connections always sit there. You're going to get this connections notification when you open up the file. You know, that's notification saying you've got connections with other sheets. And I find Power Query can really slow things down. I also find with Power Query, you can get some really weird Excel errors that I found very frustrating over the years. So a possible alternative to do all these things: data import, data cleansing, and data manipulation. That's why the box is positioned over these three boxes underneath. An alternative might be Excel VBA. Allows you to work with other files, loop through data, do data transfer and specific operations. Anything you can articulate logically, you can do with Excel VBA. So what role is it going to play in your toolkit? And as you can see, you've got more than one option here. Yeah, you want to do sophisticated data import and cleansing. You could do that with Power Query. You could also do that with Excel VBA. So we're looking at this critical consumer mindset, one of our Excel meta skills from session 3 yesterday, that critical consumer mindset. You might not need both of these, Power Query and VBA. So which one is going to work for you? It's up to you to think critically about that and to make the best selection. Okay, so we're moving on to the second of 4 key skill areas, which is data analysis in Excel. And it's a little bit simpler than data management, which is a huge topic. We're going to be dealing with that next week. So data analysis is the process of making sense of a data set by counting and categorizing the data, for example. And if you're using continuous data, applying metrics such as averages, measures of variance. So you've got a data set, you want to produce some tables, some summary measures, some charts, maybe a dashboard. All of this is data analysis. So what would be my basic recommendation? Generally, pivot tables, I think, are the most obvious approach. Now, don't get me wrong. They're pretty intimidating, pivot tables. When you insert a pivot table, you get that interface. Never seen that interface before. What's that all about? It can all seem a bit alien. And it took me a good 5 years, I would say, in my Excel career to get used to pivot tables. I vividly remember a meeting in about 2012, 2013. So I was 2 or 3 years in, where someone was showing me a pivot table and asking me to get it to work. And I just couldn't get it to work. That's what it's like. That's what it's like. Real world consultancy. Sometimes, you know, you haven't quite got the skills for the job. These days, I would definitely be able to do it. How have I got better at pivot tables? Just through practice, guys. Just through practice. We've got a beginner pivot table video on our channel. It's the most useful approach. Do they work in all situations? No, but probably the most practical and useful approach. It means basic analysis is available at the click of a button. But the reason I've really come to like or love pivot tables, not quite love, I think I like pivot tables, is pivot charts and slicers in particular are easy to add. So slicers are these little buttons that allow you to instantly apply a filter to a data set so that people can very easily manipulate the analysis. People love slices, and they are the foundation of most of the Excel dashboards that I build. So pivot tables, if you've got to do data analysis in Excel, probably your number one tool, but a nice alternative and something I use when I get frustrated with pivot tables changing formats, when I feel I don't have enough control over the layout of a pivot table, I might go for Excel formulae. Now, there's a few formulae to bear in mind here. Frequency, I've mentioned. Frequency is particularly useful where you have continuous data, continuous numerical data. I've done a little definition down here. So continuous numerical data would be, it's pretty much any number. You might have a range of decimals between 1 and 10, 1.45, 2.54, whatever it might be. Those numbers are not predetermined and specific. It could be any number in a range. That means you've got continuous data, and the frequency formula is one of my Excel secret weapons. It's brilliant for categorizing continuous data, taking all those values, putting them into buckets. So I highly recommend frequency and other Excel formulae for discrete data. Countifs. These formulae are incredibly powerful. But so you're saying to me, oh, Chris, okay, Chris, you've made a couple of recommendations there. So how do I decide what I should use? Well, to some extent, as on the previous slide, it's a case of personal preference, what's working in your situation. You've got to bring those critical skills to the table to make that selection. But it's also a case of what kind of data are you working with? Are you working with discrete data? Are you working with continuous data? This is all part of conceptual understanding. And in one of the later weeks in the course, we'll have our data analysis week, and I'll walk you through all of these techniques. But this is your quick cheat sheet for data analysis in Excel, one of our 4 key skills. Moving on to modeling. So some Excel modeling basics. So this is the third of 4 key skill areas in Excel. So what's modeling? I think it's an interesting one because people often use model as a synonym. I think that's the word for an Excel file. So an Excel file by definition is a model. They'll say, can you just email me over the model? That's not the case. Only very specific Excel files are actually models. So what's the defining characteristic of an Excel model? It refers to using formulae to create a calculation chain in Excel to reflect some kind of real world relationship that can be expressed numerically. So that sounds a little bit abstract and academic, that definition does, but I'll put the example here of a budget planner. If you just wanted to do some personal financial planning for the next year or so, you wanted to itemize everything that's coming in, everything that's going out, you wanted to get a balance and a bit of a forecast, we'd have to use Excel formulae like sum, for example, and then create a calculation chain. So one cell would be connected to another cell, would be connected to another cell, and we would have what we call input, process, and output. We can see that here on our concepts. Input cells, process cells doing the calculations, and then an output cell that displays your answer, if you like, the piece of information that's at the end of the calculation chain. And in our budget planner case, it might be our balance at the end of the year, for example. So only if that's going on, if you've got a calculation chain and input, process, output, do you have an Excel model? You know, if you have a pivot table, you don't necessarily have a model. If you're doing data input, you don't have a calculation chain, so you don't have a model. If you're doing automation, you might be doing VBA to model those calculations. Anyway, we'll get to that later in the course. That's not necessarily a good thing to do, but if you don't have formulae linked together, then you don't have an Excel model. So that's the defining characteristic. So let's go through the main areas of Excel modeling practice. Big 5 formulae. Yeah, I said in the description text for this one, there's over 500 Excel formulae available now. And Microsoft thinks the best thing it can do, I don't want to be too critical of Microsoft, is to add more formulae, to Excel. That's not the best thing you could do. The best thing you could do is provide an overview of what people are trying to do. Anyway, I won't get started, but Excel doesn't need more formulae, in my opinion. It needs a more holistic, comprehensive approach to using Excel. I promised I wouldn't go on about that now. Anyway, for modeling in particular, we only need 5 formulae. We need the basic arithmetic formulae. So these are the Ed Sheeran albums, aren't they? Addition, subtraction, division in Excel expressed using this slash, of course. and then multiplication expressed using the asterisks in Excel. So basic arithmetic formulae. We've got sum, match, offsets, and VLOOKUP. I'd also put if in here as well. The if formula should be in there. And we're going to cover these when we get onto our Excel modeling week. So, guys, you don't need to learn hundreds of formulae. You don't need to learn the latest formulae. This is the basic stuff. This is the simplification you need to kickstart your Excel analyst career. Index as an alternative for offset is possible, and XLOOKUP, if you're working in Excel 365 as an alternative for VLOOKUP, is also possible. And when we get to modeling week, we will talk about the specific situations and the pros and cons of each, applying that critical mindset. So to build Excel models, you're going to have solid formula building skills. Yes, Excel is a skill, and we view it as a skill on 30-day Excel Analyst. So what does that mean? Formula building skills means understanding the role of those dollar signs. Yeah, if we put the dollar signs in, it's going to fix a reference to a cell. So wherever that formula goes, if we're dragging that formula down, copying it somewhere else, it's still going to refer to that cell. That's an example of an absolute reference. If there's no dollar signs, it's a relative reference. So that reference will move around relative to the location of the formula, the dollar signs, the F4 key on the Windows PC. Then what does it mean when there's $1 sign? $1 sign means only the row or the column is fixed, depending on the position of the dollar sign in the reference. So we're going to cover this in modeling week. Building formulae across sheets, such a difficult thing to do, but yeah, as you build more sophisticated Excel applications, you're absolutely going to want to build formulae across sheets. So we'll cover some practical tips for making that easier. I found this incredibly frustrating and still do sometimes, building formulae across sheets. Debugging, so formulas not working. What do we do? What's that? Debugging is one of our Excel meta skills. We're calling on it all the time when we're learning Excel, when we're developing spreadsheets. So debugging for formulae, covered a few in session 2 when we spoke about the meta skills. We're going to cover them in more detail in modeling week. And then model layouts. Yeah, let's cover this quickly. So if somebody uses long Excel formulae, does it mean they're good at Excel? There's a question for you. If you use long Excel formulae, does it mean you're good at Excel? I think the opposite. If you're using long Excel formulae, it means that your model isn't properly laid out. It hasn't been properly planned. It doesn't have the columns that it needs. Much more efficient is to use more columns and shorter formulae. Easier to debug, easier for Excel to calculate. That means you retain your sanity and your model is faster. Also, we're going to talk about support tools, planning and conceptualization. Clear conceptual thinking, another one of our Excel meta skills. And we've got 2 specific tools that we're covering later in the program: input process output table and a dependency diagram. So a dependency diagram is a visualization of the dependencies in a model. And this could be considered a big simplification, but this does capture the essence of what a dependency diagram looks like. So these are conceptual visual tools for planning. I find my customers love these. Non-technical people love talking about spreadsheets if they don't have to go into Excel. So any kind of visualization of Excel, diagrams, dependency diagrams, structural diagrams we'll talk about too, they could be a real bonus for you in your analytical career. We'll also talk about when to use a data table. A data table is not a table of data. It's a table of outputs. It's more an optimization table. When to use a data table and a chart to exploit a model. We'll get to this in modeling week. And the concepts, I've touched on these already, but clear conceptual understanding really is the key to understanding the different applications of Excel and being able to build Excel models. So we're coming on to our last area of Excel practice. This is automation. This is my automation toolkit. Any questions, guys? If you want to put them in the chat, I'm very happy to deal with them in a couple of minutes once we've done this slide. So automation, the 4th area of Excel practice. Automation is the process of translating a manual process in Excel, such as copying, pasting data around. How many professionals right now across the world are doing that in Excel? And can you imagine if they had access, if they knew about automation in Excel? To a short computer program called a macro to get it done at the click of a button. Automation in Excel, and this means Excel VBA. Though you could achieve a degree of automation with Power Query, we spoke about that earlier in the presentation, VBA is at a higher order of magnitude. So yes, I don't like saying things are categorically wrong, but it's categorically wrong to say Excel Power Query is a replacement for VBA. It might be a suboptimal replacement for very specific things you might want to do with VBA, but VBA is a programming language. Anything you can articulate logically, you can program and automate with VBA. I'm not going to go into these in detail now, but we do have Automation Week. Later in the program, we're going to go through the 5 areas of Excel VBA practice. Firstly, you've got to be able to work with cells. Excel gives us those cells, so we've got to be able to interact with them in Excel VBA. Got to work with variables. So a variable, it's a bit of a mysterious thing, isn't it? If you've never done any computer programming, it's just a place to store information. That's all it is. Store information in the computer's memory. Absolutely critical to efficient and powerful macros and VBA routines. You've got to be able to control position. And that means using the offset method, or more recently, I've been favoring the dot cells method. Got to be able to implement loops. The loop is the most powerful concept in Excel VBA. It repeats an instruction any number of times. So you can tell Excel to do something 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Incredibly powerful. And then finally, conditionality. So conditionality means using an if statement to send the code one of 2 ways. If this is happening, we're going to do this. If this isn't happening, we're going to do that. So these are the 5 main areas of VBA that you're going to have to cover, develop confidence in order to automate your processes with Excel VBA. So that was just very light coverage there of automation. But if you're feeling keen to get into the automation now, you can go ahead, follow up resources in the video description below. The beginner series I recommend is our Excel VBA beginner building block series from about a year ago now. And it comes with a PDF, a course handbook, and it's 6 videos covering those areas of Excel practice, those areas of VBA practice, those 5 areas, plus an introductory video. And equally, if you were excited about data analysis and perhaps you were thinking, yeah, you know, what kind of data am I working with? What techniques would be useful for me? I recommend this video. Again, this is in the video description below. Can't do data analysis in Excel, just do this. It's my 5-step approach to doing any data analysis in Excel. So guys, that concludes the presentation. Thanks so much for watching. Big welcome to Kieran. How are you doing? You were here yesterday, so thanks for your support. The big welcome from Linda Springer, tuning in from the Netherlands. Good to see you. Arnie tuning in from down. Arnie, we won't talk about the football or soccer yesterday, my friend. Tuning in from down under, I believe. Always good to have you with us. Thank you for watching. And Heavy Downpour is with us. Heavy Downpour is saying, good week so far. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris, for your invaluable contribution to our collective understanding. You're a real champ, sir. Thank you very much for that generous comment, my friend. And this does conclude week 1 of 30-day Excel Analysts. This week was all about context and motivation. Context and motivation, giving you an overview. What stuff do you need to learn and why? Why do you need to learn it? You need to learn it because generally people are doing this in Excel. And then those meta skills. So we're talking debugging, critical consumption, planning and conceptualization. All of those meta skills are going to help you in all areas of Excel practice. So we'll be back on Monday, guys. We'll be back on Monday where we're going to be talking about our first skill area. We're going to talk through data management and equip you with exactly the skills you need to deal with real world data management problems in Excel. This has been the first week of 30-day Excel Analyst. Thanks so much for being with us, guys. If you're watching on replay, leave me a question below in the comments. I'll get back to you there, and I'll see you on Monday for week 2. Take care.